Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The abyssal plain was a canvas of eternal night, a vast, featureless expanse that swallowed light and sound. For Dr. Elias Thorne, this was home, or at least his second home. The first was the cramped, utilitarian cabin aboard the research vessel, the Challenger II, a floating citadel of science braving the crushing desolation of the Mariana Trench. I'd spent 15 years of my life charting the deep, mapping its valleys, cataloging its bizarre denizens, and pushing the boundaries of human understanding into a realm utterly hostile to it. My passion was the unseen, the untouched, the profound mysteries hidden beneath miles of water. And tonight, the abyss was preparing to reward my devotion in a way I could never have anticipated or truly survived. We were 5 weeks into a 6-week expedition, our primary objective to conduct high-resolution bathymetric surveys of a previously unexplored segment of the trench, several hundred miles east of the Challenger Deep. My team was small but dedicated. Anya, our chief sonar technician, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a mind sharper than any cutting-edge processor. Ben, the ROV pilot, a jovial giant whose hands were as delicate as a surgeon's when manipulating the submersible's robotic arms. And Captain Eva Rostova, a formidable woman who had commanded deep-sea vessels for 2 decades, her eyes reflecting the ocean's own relentless resolve. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant lullaby, a vibration felt more than heard, resonating through the hull and into my bones. I was in the sonar lab, a dimly lit space filled with glowing screens and the rhythmic ping-ping-ping of active sonar. Anya sat before a bank of monitors, her face illuminated by the green and blue topographical maps scrolling across the display. She sipped coffee, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Anything interesting, Anya?" I asked, leaning over her shoulder, my own mug steaming in my hand. Same old, Ilias," she mumbled, her eyes glued to the screen. "Just another mile of sediment, some pillow lavas, the usual suspects. I swear, sometimes I think the deepest parts of the ocean are just nature's junk drawers." I chuckled. "One man's junk drawer is another man's treasure trove, Anya. Every cubic meter has a story." It was then, a subtle shift in her posture, a slight stiffening of her shoulders. Her sip of coffee paused midair. "Wait," she said, her voice dropping to a low murmur. "That's odd." My gaze snapped to the screen. A new set of data had just rendered, a fresh swath of the seafloor revealing itself. And there, against the relatively smooth contours of the abyssal plain, was an anomaly. It wasn't a geological feature, not a seamount or a hydrothermal vent field. This was different. "Zoom in," I instructed, my voice calm, but an electric current of anticipation was already tingling beneath my skin. Anya's fingers danced across the keyboard, the image magnified, clarifying the strange forms. They were too regular, too precise. Sharp angles, rectilinear shapes, patterns that spoke of design rather than geology. A series of interconnected structures, half buried in the sediment, stretching for what looked like miles. "My God," Anya whispered, her coffee forgotten. "What is that?" My mind raced, cycling through explanations. Natural formations that mimic artificial ones, tectonic plates shifting to create perfect squares, a sunken vessel. No, this was too vast, too deeply buried, and the geometry was wrong for anything human-made. There were no rivets, no seams, no discernible signs of manufacture. The edges were impossibly clean, the angles too perfect. "Run a full spectral analysis," I ordered, my voice tight. "Cross-reference with known geological databases, check for acoustic artifacts, sensor errors, anything." For the next few hours, the lab was a hive of frantic activity. We ran every diagnostic, double-checked every calibration. The data held firm. What we were seeing was real. A series of massive, interconnected structures lay at a depth of nearly 6,000 meters, far deeper than any known human habitation or artifact. They were composed of a material that baffled our passive sonar, returning an echo that was both incredibly dense and yet strangely muted, as if it absorbed sound rather than merely reflecting it. Captain Rostova was called. She arrived, a formidable presence, her eyes narrowed as she reviewed the data. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice a gravelly rumble, "are you absolutely certain this isn't an error?" "Captain, we've exhausted every possibility of error," I replied, gesturing to the screens. "This is real and it's impossible." Her gaze lingered on the screens, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Impossible is a strong word, Doctor, but I'll admit I've never seen anything like it." "What do you propose we deploy Triton?" I said, referring to our advanced manned submersible, a marvel of deep-sea engineering capable of withstanding extreme pressures. "We need eyes on this." "We need samples." Anya looked at me, a worried frown on her face. 6,000 meters, Elias, that's pushing Triton to its limits, and we don't know what's down there." "Exactly," I countered, my voice firm. "That's why we have to go." This could be the most significant discovery in human history. The next morning, the ship hummed with a different kind of tension. The air was thick with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Ben, the ROV pilot, would man Triton. I would go with him as chief scientist. Anya would monitor our descent from the surface, along with Captain Ristova. Strapping into the cramped cockpit of Triton was a familiar ritual. The pressure hull, a sphere of reinforced titanium, felt simultaneously like a coffin and a womb. Cables connected us to the surface, a fragile lifeline to the world above. Ben, ever jovial, cracked a nervous joke. "Don't worry, Doc, I'll get us back in time for dinner, even if we have to make a pit stop at Atlantis." I managed a weak smile. The truth was, my gut was churning. This wasn't like discovering a new species of anglerfish. This was something fundamentally other. The submersible was lowered into the inky blackness. The surface lights dwindled, then vanished, replaced by the glow of Triton's own powerful external lamps. The descent was long, a slow plunge through ever-increasing pressure. The temperature inside the sub dropped steadily, despite our internal heaters. Outside, it was barely above freezing. "Depth 1,000 meters, Ben announced, his voice a calm monotone over the comms. Pressure building nicely. The world outside was a shifting canvas of black. Occasionally, a ghostly bioluminescent creature would drift past, its fleeting light a brief, ethereal dance in the void. My scientific mind, usually so adept at categorization and explanation, felt oddly numb, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the unknown we were approaching. Depth 5,000 meters. Approaching target zone, Anya's voice crackled over the comms, a welcome anchor to reality. My heart hammered against my ribs. I leaned forward, pressing my face against the thick acrylic viewport, straining to see. Nothing but black. "Lights on max," I instructed Ben. He complied, and the powerful beams of Triton pierced the darkness, cutting through the swirling motes of deep-sea detritus. And then there they were. They rose from the abyssal floor like monoliths, not organic, not geological, but something else entirely. Massive, dark, utterly alien structures. They weren't carved or built in any way I understood. They simply were. Jagged yet impossibly smooth, angled yet defying Euclidean geometry. Some segments seemed to absorb the light from our powerful lamps, appearing as perfect, lightless voids, while others reflected it in strange, distorted ways, shimmering with an unsettling, internal luminescence of their own. "My God," Ben breathed, his joviality completely gone, replaced by a profound awe. They stretched out as far as our lights could reach, a labyrinth of impossible architecture. Some structures were pyramidal, others seemed to be vast, intersecting planes. They were covered in a fine layer of sediment, suggesting immense age, yet their forms were pristine, unmarred by erosion or the crushing forces of the deep. There were no windows, no doors, no discernible entrances. They were monolithic, silent, and utterly inscrutable. "Maintain distance, Ben," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Approach slowly. Give me a full 360 scan." As Ben maneuvered Triton, the full scope of the discovery began to sink in. This wasn't a few scattered ruins. This was an entire city, a dead city perhaps, or a sleeping one. "Anya, Captain, are you seeing this?" I asked over the comms, wanting confirmation that this wasn't some deep-sea delirium induced by pressure and lack of sleep. "We're seeing it, Ilya's." Anya's voice came back, strained. "The scale is incomprehensible." "Indeed," Captain Ristova added, her voice now devoid of its usual stoicism, tinged with a palpable sense of unease. "Proceed with extreme caution, Dr. Thorne." We spent hours surveying the periphery, taking countless readings. The material composition remained a mystery. Our multispectral lasers simply couldn't penetrate the surface. It was denser than anything known, yet our sonar readings of its internal structure were vague, diffuse, as if the material itself defied precise measurement. There was an unnerving silence surrounding the structures. Even the usual clicks and whispers of the deep seemed absent, or perhaps were merely dwarfed by the profound stillness emanating from these ancient forms. As we continued, a strange sensation began to settle over me. It wasn't just the cold seeping into the sub, nor the physical claustrophobia of the sphere. It was a mental chill, a feeling of being utterly insignificant, a tiny spark of life observing something vast and indifferent. I found myself staring at a particular structure, a colossal, obsidian-like wall that seemed to curve inward at impossible angles, creating a sort of negative space that pulled at my eyes. It seemed to pulse very faintly with that internal, light-absorbing shimmer. "Did you just see that?" I asked Ben, my heart giving a violent lurch. "See what, Doc?" The wall. "It just shifted." Ben adjusted Triton's position, bringing the lights to bear fully on the section I indicated. "Looks stable to me, Ilya's, just a trick of the light maybe," but I was certain it had changed. Not a large shift, but a subtle, almost imperceptible rearrangement of its surface, like scales on some colossal, dormant beast. I knew it wasn't an illusion. My mind, however, immediately tried to rationalize it. Pressure distortion, optical artifact, sensory fatigue. Let's try to get a sample, I said, my voice regaining some scientific authority, trying to push away the creeping dread. Ben, can you maneuver the arm to that outcropping? He nodded, his face grim now. The robotic arm extended, a marvel of dexterity even under such crushing pressure. As it approached the surface of the structure, a low, resonant hum filled the cockpit. It wasn't coming from the subsystems. It was external, deep and pervasive, vibrating through the hull and into my very bones. What the hell was that? Ben exclaimed, his eyes wide. Passive sonar readings are picking up a low-frequency hum, Anya's voice crackled, laced with alarm. It's originating from the structures themselves. The hum intensified, a throbbing pulse that seemed to resonate with my skull. It felt less like a sound and more like a presence, a psychic vibration. I felt a sudden, intense nausea, a disorienting spin in my head. Ben, abort, I yelled, clutching my head. Get us out of here. Before he could react, a jolt rocked Triton. The robotic arm, which had just touched the surface of the structure, snapped back violently, sparks showering from its joints. Alarms blared. System malfunction. Pressure breach warning, Ben shouted, struggling with the controls. Arm compromised, we're losing thruster control. The sub spun wildly, the lights outside flickering erratically as power surged and drained. The hum intensified to an unbearable thrum, a sound that felt like it was tearing apart the fabric of reality itself. Through the viewport, I saw it again. The structures themselves seemed to pulse, their impossible angles shifting, their light-absorbing surfaces deepening into an infinite void. It was as if they were alive, awakened by our touch, pushing back. Get us up now, I screamed into the comms. Ben fought the controls with grim determination. Slowly, agonizingly, Triton began to ascend, listing heavily. The hum receded, but its imprint remained, vibrating in my teeth, echoing in my brain. The last thing I saw before the structures faded into the black was a sudden, intense flash of something that wasn't light, but a momentary absence of darkness, revealing what looked like intricate, glowing glyphs covering the surface of one of the colossal walls, shifting and writhing like living script before they vanished. The ascent was a nightmare. Alarms blared, systems failed, and the damaged arm flopped uselessly outside. When we finally broke the surface, the relief was immense, yet it was overshadowed by a profound, chilling terror. Back aboard the Challenger II, the damage to Triton was assessed. The robotic arm was twisted beyond repair, its instruments melted. But more disturbingly, the sample container, designed to withstand extreme pressure and heat, was found to be shattered, reduced to dust, as if its contents had violently exploded from within. No one could explain it. The hum it affected our systems, Anya theorized, pale-faced. A high-energy sonic pulse, maybe, something we couldn't process. I knew it was more than that. It was a conscious pushback. The structures had rejected us. Over the next few days, an unspoken dread settled over the ship. The data we had collected was overwhelming, baffling every scientific principle we held dear. The geometric irregularities, the impossible material, the apparent sentience of the hum, it was all too much. My sleep became fractured. I saw the impossible angles of the structures in my dreams, their light-absorbing surfaces pulling at me, the low hum reverberating in my ears. I kept seeing the shifting glyphs, though I knew I'd only seen them for a fraction of a second. They imprinted themselves on my mind, intricate and unsettling, like a language I was almost, but not quite, able to comprehend. I pored over the sonar data again and again. Anya had captured a full-spectrum audio recording of the hum. When played back, it wasn't just a low-frequency pulse. There were complex patterns within it, almost like layered voices, but utterly alien, speaking a dialect of dread. Ben, usually robust, became withdrawn, his eyes hollow. He claimed to hear the hum even when we weren't playing the recording. It's in my head, Ilyas, he whispered to me one night, his voice hoarse, like a buzzing right behind my eyeballs. And when it gets louder, I see things. What things, Ben? I asked, my own skin crawling. Shadows in the periphery, like something moving in the dark, just out of sight. And the patterns, Doc, the patterns on those walls. They're there everywhere now. He rubbed his temples vigorously, his eyes wide with a manic fear I was beginning to recognize in myself. Captain Rostova called me to her office. Her face was grim. Dr. Thorne, I'm ordering us back to port. We've sustained significant damage to Triton, and the crew's morale is compromised. This discovery needs to be reported, but it needs to be done under proper channels, with better equipment and greater safety precautions. Her decision was rational, logical. But for me, it was a betrayal. I was so close. The structures were calling to me. I felt an inexplicable compulsion to return, to understand. The glyphs, they were a puzzle I needed to solve. Captain, we can't just leave, I protested, my voice rising. This is too important. We have to go back down, even if it's just the ROV. We need more data, more samples. Absolutely not, Doctor, she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. My priority is the safety of my crew and vessel. We are leaving within 24 hours. That night, a storm rolled in, fierce and sudden. The ship pitched and groaned, battling colossal waves. Communications with the outside world were completely severed. It was a blessing and a curse. I couldn't sleep. The hum was now a constant companion, a dull ache behind my eyes. The glyphs danced in my peripheral vision. I found myself sketching them on scraps of paper, trying to decipher them, to find a pattern. They seemed to shift, to rearrange themselves even on the page, twisting into shapes that were both familiar and horrifyingly new. I knew I couldn't leave, not yet. The structures were waiting. They were calling. Using the ship's internal network, I accessed the ROV Squid's controls. It was smaller, less robust than Triton, but it was fully functional. And it could still reach the depth. I had to go back. I had to. The need was overwhelming, a burning obsession that eclipsed all reason, all fear. I knew what I was doing was reckless, insubordinate, perhaps even suicidal. But the scientific curiosity, the cosmic pull of the unknown, was too strong. I needed answers. I needed to understand the glyphs. I needed to know what lay within those structures. Under the cover of the storm, as the ship battled the raging surface, I slipped into the control room. Ben was asleep in his bunk, exhausted. Anya was probably trying to restore comms. Captain Rostova would be on the bridge. I was alone. I fired up Squid, the camera's word to life. I initiated deployment. The ROV was lowered into the turbulent waters, rocking violently before it plunged into the calmer, deeper darkness. The descent was agonizingly slow. I watched the depth gauge tick down, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The screen showed nothing but black, punctuated by the occasional flash of a fish or a flurry of marine snow. The hum was back, not just in my head, but emanating faintly from the Squid's external microphones. It was louder now, more insistent, like a song sung just below the threshold of human hearing, beckoning. Finally, the familiar, impossible forms appeared. They seemed clearer this time, sharper, almost glowing with an inner darkness. I maneuvered Squid closer, feeling a cold rush of both terror and exhilaration. The glyphs were there, covering entire sections of the monolithic walls, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow even as I watched them through the ROV's camera. They weren't merely markings. They were part of the structures, inherent to their very being, like veins in a colossal alien organism, and they were moving, slowly, imperceptibly at first, then with a fluid, liquid grace. I brought Squid closer to one of the larger pyramidal structures. Its sheer size was overwhelming. As the ROV approached, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A faint seam, a hairline fracture in the otherwise seamless surface near the base of the pyramid. It was almost perfectly camouflaged, designed to be missed. It wasn't a seam, I realized with a jolt of ice-cold horror. It was an opening. The hum intensified, vibrating through my entire body, causing my vision to blur. It felt like my brain was being stretched, pulled apart, reassembled. The glyphs on the screen seemed to dance faster, swirling like ink in water. They were not static, they were alive, they were communicating. Driven by an instinct beyond my control, I guided Squid toward the opening. It was narrow, just wide enough for the ROV. The darkness within was absolute, deeper than the abyss itself, swallowing the ROV's powerful lights. As Squid entered, the external microphones picked up a new sound, distinct from the hum. It was a soft, rhythmic thump-thump, like a colossal heartbeat, echoing from within the depths of the structure. The temperature reading from the ROV dropped dramatically, far below the ambient deep-sea temperature, plunging into levels that defied the laws of thermodynamics. The screen flickered, the camera struggled to pierce the interior darkness. For a moment all I saw was static, a blizzard of noise. Then a faint image began to resolve itself. It was vast. An enormous chamber, impossibly large, stretching further than the ROV's lights could illuminate. The walls were covered in the same shifting glyphs, glowing with that impossible inner darkness, illuminating nothing yet somehow allowing me to perceive. The floor was not flat but seemed to undulate like a colossal, obsidian-black ocean, and in the center of the chamber something pulsed. It wasn't a living creature as I understood it. It was a nexus, a confluence of energy and form that defied all description. It was colossal, a churning void of purest darkness, yet somehow solid, radiating an immense pressure that threatened to crush Squid even without physical contact. Tendrils of what looked like solidified shadow extended from it, snaking across the chamber floor, connecting to the glyphs on the walls. The hum was deafening now, reverberating not just in my ears, but in my very soul. The glyphs on the walls pulsed in rhythm with the entity in the center. I realized with a terrifying clarity that shattered my sanity that the structures weren't just buildings. They were vessels, and the entity in the center was its heart, its mind. As I stared, transfixed, the glyphs on the screen began to change, to morph, to coalesce into something I could almost comprehend. They were not merely symbols, they were thoughts, concepts, a language of pure alien consciousness. And they were flowing into my mind, bypassing my eyes, my ears, directly into my brain. I saw things, not images, but pure ideas, the vastness of time stretching back before the universe as we knew it. Civilizations rising and falling in distant galaxies, the true, terrifying emptiness between stars. The entity was ancient, impossibly old, a cosmic horror that had slumbered beneath the Earth's crust for eons, untouched, undisturbed. And now I had awakened it. The entity in the chamber pulsed, and I felt a sudden, agonizing pressure in my skull, as if my brain was trying to contain an entire universe of impossible knowledge. I saw the true nature of reality, not as a construct of stable physics, but as a thin veil over an abyss of chaos. The universe was not a cold, indifferent place, but a churning, malevolent void, and this entity was merely an outpost, a single, minuscule cell of a consciousness so vast it would shred sanity with a mere whisper. The glyphs on the screen, now searing themselves into my retinas, dissolved into raw, unfiltered information. I understood their purpose. They were a control interface, a communication array, a prison. The entity pulsed again, and I saw flashes of the Challenger II on the surface, tossed by the storm. I saw Anya, Ben, Captain Rostova, their faces contorted in silent screams. I saw their minds ripped open, their sanity devoured. The entity was not merely awakening, it was reaching through the miles of water, through the storm, reaching for the surface, for the world, and it was using me, my connection to the ROV, my brain. I tried to pull back, to sever the connection, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. My fingers were locked onto the controls, my eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the horrifying spectacle on the screen. The hum filled every cell of my body, transforming into a symphony of alien voices, whispering promises of ultimate truth, of ultimate oblivion. The last thing I saw through the ROV's flickering camera before the feed cut out completely was the entity in the chamber expanding, its tendrils of darkness now thicker, faster, snaking towards Squid. Its surface rippled, not with light, but with an internal, consuming darkness like a living black hole. And from its depths, a single, impossibly vast, lidless eye opened, a gaping maw of cosmic horror that gazed directly into my soul. I don't know how long I was there, slumped over the control panel. When I finally came to, the room was dark, the monitors black. The ship was still battling the storm, the groaning of the hull a familiar, terrifying sound. My head throbbed, a dull ache behind my eyes. The hum was still there, but muted, a constant, low-frequency presence in the back of my mind. I stumbled out of the control room. The ship was quiet, too quiet. I found Anya slumped over her console in the sonar lab, her eyes wide open, staring at a blank screen. Her mouth was agape, a silent scream frozen on her face. Ben was found in his bunk, curled into a fetal position, his eyes dried out, staring at the ceiling. Captain Rostova was on the bridge, her hands still gripping the helm, her face a mask of terror. They were all dead. Their minds shattered, their life force simply gone, drained. The storm raged outside, but I knew it was more than just a storm. It was the entity, it was reaching. And I was the only one left, the only one who had seen. The only one who knew, and the hum, it was no longer just a sound. It was a part of me now, resonating in my very bones, a constant communication link to the impossible knowledge I had glimpsed. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. On the back of my right hand, a faint, geometric pattern had appeared, a swirling glyph etched into my skin, glowing with a barely perceptible, light-absorbing shimmer. It was moving, changing. I walked to the ship's comms room. The systems were still down from the storm, but I knew it didn't matter. No one would believe me. Even if I could speak, what would I say? How do you describe something that fundamentally warps reality? I made my way to the deck. The storm was an angry beast, the waves like mountains. The air was frigid, tasting of salt and ozone. I looked out at the churning black water, knowing what lay beneath. It was awake, and it was hungry. The glyph on my hand pulsed, and I felt a surge of cold understanding. I was not just a survivor. I was a messenger, a conduit. The entity hadn't just shattered their minds. It had found a new host. A new connection to the surface world. I felt a faint, echoing hum in the very core of my being, not external but internal. It was a presence, a voice deep within me, whispering truths that would unravel the world. The structures were not just structures, they were gates, and I had opened one. The abyssal plane was no longer just the deep sea. It was a doorway, and the entities were starting to stir, their ancient consciousnesses extending, reaching for the warmth, the light, the unsuspecting life of the surface world. I am Dr. Elias Thorne, and I have seen what lies beneath, and it is coming. The hum is growing stronger, the glyphs are spreading, and soon the entire world will hear its song.